Coming in at number 10, we have Nebula, the adopted daughter of Thanos. While Nebula has always been a complex character with complicated motives no matter what version we're talking about, the Nebula of the comics had a much different role in the Infinity Saga than the one many are familiar with from the movies. In the original Infinity Gauntlet miniseries, Nebula was tortured by Thanos into becoming a half-dead, zombie-like creature, doomed to wander around Thanos' throne as punishment. However, when Thanos ascended to godhood and left his physical body after defeating much of the Marvel Universe's most powerful forces, Nebula found the strength to pull the gauntlet off of Thanos' arm and claim the power for herself. In her fury, she undid all of Thanos' actions, but nearly threatened to destroy the universe herself, before she was eventually defeated and had the gauntlet taken from her by Doctor Strange, Adam Warlock, and the Silver Surfer. Coming in at number 9, we have the Council of Reeds. While not commonly known as outright villains, the Council of Reeds have a complicated history with the Mr. Fantastic most commonly seen in Marvel Comics. A collection of Reed Richards from across the multiverse that have chosen to abandon their families and entire worlds behind in order to combine their intellect into one unified group, the Council of Reeds claim to do everything they do for the better of the multiverse, as their new home is in the expanse in between the different universes. All of this is possible due to the leaders of the Council of Reeds having taken the Infinity Gauntlets from their own realities and used them to create everything needed for their council to function. Incredibly smart but emotionally distant dudes with a trio of Infinity Gauntlets in their possession? What could possibly go wrong? Coming in at number 8, we have MAGUS, the arch enemy of Adam Warlock. Following the events of the original Infinity Gauntlet storyline, Adam Warlock separated his personality into a good and evil half, and in a twist that nobody could have seen coming, the evil half wound up getting out of control. Named MAGUS, this twisted version of Warlock used multiple cosmic cubes to launch a war against the Marvel Universe, creating evil doppelgangers to fight every superhero on the planet Earth. MAGUS eventually got his hands on the Infinity Gauntlet and was only able to be defeated after that point because Thanos had replaced the Soul Gem with a fake. Good job, Thanos. Totally makes up for all the other stuff you've done. Coming in at number 7, we have Norman Osborn, aka the Green Goblin. In the alternate what-if reality of Earth 14154, Norman Osborn discovered the existence of the Infinity Gauntlet while serving as the leader of Hammer. Ordering several other villains to assassinate members of the Illuminati, Norman was able to assemble all of the Infinity Stones and granted himself the name of the Goblin King before attacking Asgard alongside his newly powered-up army of Dark Avengers. Standing victorious, the only thing left for Norman to do was, interestingly enough, try to work out his father issues, bringing his deceased dad forward in time to see all that he had accomplished. But when his father reacted with only horror at what Norman had done, Norman obliterated him from the timeline, unintentionally removing himself as well, because if there's one thing comic books love, it's weird, timey-wimey paradoxes. Coming in at number 6, we have the infamous Dr. Doom. On the alternate world of Earth 90-251, Victor Von Doom was able to hold on to the Beyonder's powers that he had briefly gained in the main Marvel universe during the Secret Wars crossover. With the strength of the Beyonder at his disposal, Doom was able to easily defeat an army of heroes assembled by Sue Storm, and was able to ascend to the level of godhood within this universe. Funnily enough, by the time he collected the Infinity Stones and the Gauntlet, he no longer even needed their strength. He simply wore the gauntlet as a trophy, showing that the former most powerful objects in the universe were now just trinkets to him. Coming in at number 5, we have the Ultimate Hulk. Now, while I personally believe the Hulk deserves to be called a hero more often than not, the version of Bruce Banner from the Ultimate Universe does have a nasty habit of going completely out of control on a more regular basis than the usual Marvel Universe. While imprisoned by S.H.I.E.L.D., the Hulk was visited by the Ultimate version of Kang the Conqueror, who gifted the Hulk 2 different Infinity Gauntlets capable of wielding the 8 stones of the Ultimate Universe, but at the moment only possessing 5 of them. Using the gauntlets, the Hulk was able to break free from his prison and bring the fight to the rest of the Ultimates team, showing that maybe locking up the Hulk isn't the greatest idea in the world. Coming in at number 4, we're hopping over to DC with DARKSEID. That's right, the character that's often controversially compared to Thanos has actually wielded the Infinity Gauntlet himself during a particularly notable crossover. In the JLA/Avengers miniseries, important artifacts from both the Marvel and DC universe are spread throughout the multiverse and ordered to be collected by both the Avengers and the Justice League, with one of these artifacts, of course, being the Infinity Gauntlet. Unfortunately, its hiding place is on Darkseid's home of Apocalypse, and the evil ruler is already wearing the gauntlet. Luckily though, the Infinity Stones themselves wind up having no power in the DC universe, allowing the heroes an easier time in recovering the gauntlet, but the thought of Darkseid being allowed to take full control of the Infinity Stones is still an incredibly foreboding thought. Coming in at number 3, we have ULTRON. In the Disney Plus series What If, ULTRON is the final big bad of the first season, in an alternate universe where he's able to fulfill his plan of taking over Vision's body, and uses the power of his single Infinity Stone to destroy this Earth's Avengers and cause a nuclear apocalypse. To make matters even worse, when this reality's Thanos arrives with the gauntlet and the other 5 Infinity Stones collected, ULTRON is able to kill Thanos with ease and take the stones that he oh so kindly collected for him. This version of ULTRON becomes so powerful that even the Watcher is forced to break his vow and form the Guardians of the Multiverse to stop him, as ULTRON's ambitions have him beginning to conquer entire realities. Coming in at number 2, you know we can't have a list about the Infinity Gauntlet without giving Thanos a slot. And while the comic version of Thanos is obviously iconic and the main inspiration for all the various adaptations that would follow, my personal favorite version has to be the one from the MCU, portrayed by Josh Brolin. This version of Thanos isn't lusting after death, but rather has gotten it stuck in his head that the only possible way to save the universe is to wipe out half the life in it. Thanos is obviously one of the more powerful villains in the entire Marvel multiverse, but the most chilling thing about the MCU version is just how calm and resigned to his task he is, especially in Infinity War. This is a guy that just wants to commit his cosmic genocide because he feels he has to, and then go settle down on a farm. And finally, coming in at our top spot, the one character more villainous than Thanos is Santa Claus. No, I'm not being a Scrooge. I love Christmas, but the Marvel Universe has actually had it that Santa Claus was briefly one of the most powerful villains to ever wield the Infinity Gauntlet. Following the disappearance of his reindeer, Santa asks the Avengers if he can borrow the Infinity Gauntlet in order to deliver all of his toys in one night. Unfortunately, this winds up being a bit too much for Santa to handle, and he goes mad with power, only finally being able to be stopped by a well-aimed snowball from Namor. It's debatable on whether this holiday one-off was a canon adventure or not, but at least now we always know that Thanos and Santa Claus have something in common.
Starting us off in at number 10, VLAD PLASMIUS. In the world of Danny Phantom, there exists a select few individuals with the ability to transition between a human form and a ghost form. One of these is Danny Phantom, the other is a female clone of him named Danny Phantom, but the third is probably the most important one, VLAD PLASMIUS, also known as VLAD Masters, Amity Park's mayor and Danny's dad's old college friend who's in love with his wife. Yeah. Vlad is secretly a human-ghost hybrid, actually the first to come into existence, following an accident that was caused by a college experiment that he was working on with Jack and Maddie, which are Danny's parents, in which Vlad gained his powers. Having been a half-ghost for the last 20 years, he serves as the main antagonist of the series, acting as just Danny's ultimate villain. But I mean, being a human-ghost hybrid and being the reason Danny Phantom goes dark in another timeline where his family's blown up is certainly worthy of getting him on this list. Plus, I love Danny Phantom. Butch, send me a pop figure, please. I couldn't find one.
Number 9, Haziral. Heziril is the demon who possesses the leader of the Rat Queens, Hannah. Hannah is an elven necromancer in the series whose very existence as well as the type of magic she practiced made her controversial while growing up. As such, she ends up making a pact with the demon Heziril to get access to magic so that she can pass her classes at Mage U. This prompts her to grow horns and also makes her indebted and permanently bonded to the demon. Using such dark magic has consequences, of course, and when she taps into it, it can cause Hannah to go kind of into a pretty crazy frenzy, losing control over herself as her darker side and the demon within her takes over. In Rat Queens, Hannah was prompted to use this power again to save her friends and fellow Rat Queens after years of resisting the temptation of said demonic power. Unfortunately, this also meant she would have to confront Heziril after years of staving off the demon's power and influence. In a way, Heziril is also like a symbol for Hannah's own inner demons, though he is himself literally a demon with his own wants and desires. Both a symbol and an actual demon. Mainly, he loves Hannah and he wants to continue to be as close to her at any cost. Which is obviously not very good for her, but Hannah also has a lot of shit that she needs to work out, so yeah.
And it ain't Dave. Dave's origin is unknown as of yet, but it is heavily inferred that he was like the other thousands of robots in this series, created by humans to serve a certain task. However, the robots became advanced enough to form their own conscious thoughts, so of course they revolted and killed off the entire human race. It was shown that Dave was one of the robots that served in combat and also helped fight off numerous alien races, and after the wars, robots seemed to act entirely like humans, adopting their culture and their way of life. Dave had a wife named Sally, who he actually later divorced because apparently even robot girlfriends are unbearable, and a son called Scotty. However, he is now a nobody working as an office drone, which only makes him more of a villain, despite being the protagonist of the story, because like, given that he wiped out the entire human race, I think it's safe to say that he's a villain.
Number 7. Scorpina. Scorpina was known for being one of Rita Repulsa's most capable enforcers in the television show Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and the same can be said for her comic book counterpart. In fact, I'd even say that Scorpina is a bit more ruthless in the comics, in my opinion. She ends up becoming a somewhat reluctant and sassy ally later on, but starts out as a strong and menacing villain to the Power Rangers. Scorpina is known for her determination, expert fighting skills, and her intelligence. She initially is presented as a major enemy for Tommy Oliver, the Green Ranger, as he struggles to fight against Rita Repulsa's influence and hold over him. Scorpina would also go on to work alongside Lord Draken, the evil alternate future version of Tommy, and would later succeed him as the leader of his army.
And at 6, Death. We all love a good rendition of death, right? Of course we do, that's like the foundation of any good comic storyline. Well, in East of West, the whole story is about death, with this version of the Horseman being the protagonist of the series. And not only is he the Horseman of Death, but they're actually a horseman as well, considering how East of West is Wild West themed. However, this time around, Death, formerly of the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, fell in love with someone named Xyloin, something like that. I probably butchered it, but oh well. And then had a son with her, which is a whole other can of worms. Presumably killed by Bel Solomon of the Chosen though. He survived with the help of Wolf and Crow. Since then, the White Horseman embarked on a quest for revenge over his wife and son. And in the most recent incarnation, Death possessed skin that was jet black instead of the pure white skin that he has now. He was also the only horseman who didn't get a gender change in the new reincarnation. Alright, I mean it's Death, so Death is genderless. But I mean, he may be good in the story though, but I think it's safe to say that Death before this series was a pretty, well, like, death-loving guy. Self-love.
Number 5. Violator. Violator was always an indie villain that haunted my nightmares as a kid. Violator is the clown character with blue face paint from the Spawn film, who was played by John Leguizamo. I love John Leguizamo, but this role, wow. Also, John Leguizamo and everything is kind of wow, it's great. Not only did he crush it, but it also felt like he kind of crushed me and my soul under the terror of the Violator. The Violator in the comics is a Spawn villain who is one of the most powerful demons of hell. He often focuses on getting Spawn to use his necro powers, trying to get him sent back to hell to become Malabolgia's servant faster, but also serves to prepare Hellspawn for joining the army of Satan. Of course, that doesn't mean that he enjoys his job, and he often seeks to try and undermine his master. Violator is basically immortal as well. Despite dying many times, he's often reanimated shortly after in hell, only to return to torment Spawn some more. Yay.
In at 4, Nemesis. At the start of this series, the supervillain Nemesis destroys a building in Tokyo, killing a SWAT team and a police inspector. In Washington, D.C., the FBI informs Metro Police Chief Inspector Blake Morrow that Nemesis is targeting him next. Haha. Wonderful. He's given a card reading Black Morrow, March 12th at midnight, flatline still counts. Morrow has his family put in protective custody, and then Nemesis hijacks Air Force One over the District of Columbia, taking the United States president hostage and crashing the plane. Nemesis makes an international broadcast, revealing the president as a hostage in front of him, and then finishing it off by saying, "It's time you hail your new chief." Nemesis reveals to his henchman that his real name is Matt Anderson, and his father had committed suicide after Morrow tried to imprison him for hunting runaway teenagers with his rich friends. Bored of well behavior and less excitement, Anderson traveled around the world to learn the ways of crime, hoping to fulfill his mother's dying wish to have Morrow killed. So I think you can understand that this guy is pretty messed up and a powerful villain.
Number 3, Dracula. I think Dracula is a really important villain of Vampirella's to talk about since he also just surprisingly married her. In Priest's Vampirella series, he had these two longtime enemies tie the knot recently, shaking things up completely. I know when I heard about this going down, I was like, what? Actually, a lot of Priest's run has been shaking up the status quo and the world of Vampirella in interesting, exciting, and of course, bloody ways. Of course, the version of Dracula we see in this series isn't the conventional one that you're used to seeing when it comes to Vampirella's comics. This version of Dracula is a reincarnation that is attempting to cheat fate by marrying Vampy, thereby altering his destiny and hopefully saving his life. For years in the comics though, Vampirella's nemesis Drac was often posed as the lord of a bunch of evil vampires, with all the vampires kind of coming from his blood lineage being corrupt in some way. It was like he only made bad vampires. That was like a whole thing. Dracula has also been shown in the past to be an exiled vampire from the planet Draculon, Vampirella's home world. Of course, Dynamite isn't the only publisher to feature Dracula. While we might be focusing on the Vampy version and his long history there, Dracula has also appeared throughout multiple different series spanning across various different publishers. And if you're like, man, but I already knew about Dracula, I don't know if you knew about his connection to Vampirella, but now you do! Yay!
Penultimately, in at number 2, Overlord. A superpowered crime lord who operates out of Chicago, he is the archenemy of the Savage Dragon and the leader of Vicious Circle. There have been 3 people who had this mantle though: Antonio Seghetti, who I keep trying to call Antonio Spaghetti, Victor Nixon, and Flash Mercury. Antonio Seghetti grew up in Chicago around the time of Al Capone and became fascinated with the mafia way of life. When his sister was being in an alleyway, the 8-year-old Seghetti stabbed the man responsible and claimed his first victim. This act led to a life of crime, and he soon came under the wing of a man who would become Octopus, whilst also rising up through the ranks of the mafia. Once he had reached a position of authority in the mafia, Seghetti vowed that he would never lose his power, but his position came under threat when a superpowered freak became the dominant figures in Chicago's crime sector. Seeking resources and methods with which to cement his leadership position in Chicago, Seghetti forced alliances with the Nation of Lieberheim and cyberdata organizations, and as well became Overlord, because that's what you do.
Number 1, Lady Death. Because, you know, one comic book version of Death wasn't enough, so we had to do another one. Lady Death is one of the most powerful female supervillains out there, as she is literally the embodiment of death. And if you think you know about this Lady Death, you might not, because we're not talking about the one from Marvel. She hails from the Bad Girl comic days, where it was trendy for female characters to be bad, whether that be bad as anti-heroes, full-on heroes, or villains. In Lady Death's case, she was mainly known as a villain. She first debuted with Chaos Comics, but has changed publishers since her initial appearance with them. Lady Death originally was the beautiful and sexy woman who seduced Ernest Fairchild into becoming a full-on psychotic killer, who would later become known as Evil Ernie. As such, her first appearance was in Evil Ernie issue number 1 in the original black and white 1991 series. The Evil Ernie War of the Dead series finishes with Ernie managing to kill everyone on Earth in order to win Lady Death's favor. He does so by instigating an all-out nuclear war, ending the story with a mushroom cloud, and then ending the story again with a mushroom cloud of his face.
In at 10, Baron Blood. Lord John Falsworth was the youngest of 2 sons of Lord William Falsworth, one of the wealthiest members of the British aristocracy in late Victorian and Edwardian times. John left embittered when his older brother Montgomery inherited the title and the bulk of his estate upon William's death, shortly before World War I. Eventually, Falsworth sought the Castle Dracula in Romania in order to find and control the Dracula as a means of achieving immense wealth and power. However, However, Falseworth fell victim to Dracula's hypnotic powers because you know he's a vampire and was turned into a vampire himself. Dracula bid Falseworth to return to England to wreak havoc upon the country that had repulsed him earlier. Although Falseworth's activities remained largely unrevealed during this time, at some point he again offered his services to the emerging fascist regime in Germany. That's right, folks. We gotta... can't really say it. German scientists performed painful experiments which enabled him to avoid his vulnerability to direct sunlight, and during World War II, German intelligence once again sent Falseworth to England to continue a new reign of terror. Wonderful. And at 9, Batman. Bruce Wayne died when the vigilante Batman was turned into a vampire. With now only one side of his dual life to take care of, the vampire haunts the nights, frightening and biting criminals. With most of the vampires being destroyed, Batman confronted Dracula and killed him by impaling the ancient vampire on a tree that was destroyed by lightning. However, the victory came at a cost, because during the fight Dracula successfully drained the last of Batman's blood, destroying his humanity. Nonetheless, Batman retained his sense of self and assured Alfred that only Bruce Wayne had died, the Batman will live on. And thanks to his new vampiric powers, he would be able to protect Gotham City forever. Because, you know, immortality. Not only that though, but then Batman went on to turn the other Justice League members into vampires. Batman lost his supernatural companion of a vampirized Catwoman when she took a fatal crossbow bolt that was aimed at him. Overcome with rage over the death of the only person able to control his bloodlust, Batman killed the Joker and drained all his blood, which only led to more draining. And at 8, Zaris. Zaris is the son of Dracula. Angry with humanity, encroaching into vampire territory, and unhappy with his founder's leadership, Zaris created a secret alliance with the leaders of various vampire sects. The CLAUS sect, which was warriors, the Charnaputra sect, Mysticos sect, Nosferatu sect, Atlantean sect, the Moshka sect, and the Siren sect, all to overthrow his father. He accomplished this at the Centennial Meeting of the Vampires. Yeah, they have a meeting every 100 years. He and his allies drove stakes into Dracula and cut his head off, and his allies, like Mysticos, invented devices which cancelled the frequencies of light that were harmful to vampires. So Zaris decided to use these devices to create a new, more dominant place in the world for vampires. He gave these devices to his allies so they could stage a raid on Krieger sect's fortress, eliminating their senior leadership. A vampire with devices that cancel out what the vampire's weaknesses are? No thanks. And at number 7, Harkon Volkihar. Lord Volkihar is actually the main antagonist of the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim's DLC Dawnguard's main storyline. This vampire lord is not only a vampire, but he can also shapeshift into a vampire lord form that gives him a boost to all of his abilities and magics. Lord Volkihar once read a prophecy about a bow that could blot out the sun permanently, causing Skyrim to be a land free for vampires to roam. But to complete this prophecy, he needs Auriel's bow, which is technically also known as Akatosh's bow, since Auriel is just the elven name for Akatosh, and a daughter of Cold Harbor, which was a pure-blooded vampire made by the Daedric Lord Molag Bal after a, let's call it a ritual. This nearly came to fruition when you brought him both the bow and his own daughter before your final battle. So if you didn't end up winning, you'd be handing this vampiric lord everything he needs to take over Skyrim. So yeah, it's pretty messed up. And that's even if you don't become a vampire lord in the storyline, which you also can do. However, you end up still having to kill Harkon anyway, since he doesn't really need you anymore, etc. So yeah, pretty powerful dude, unless you have like a 100 archery skill. And at 6, The Flash. Barry Allen, aka The Flash, is one of the former heroes who turned into a bloodthirsty vampire after Batman spread the vampiric plague throughout the world of Earth 43. He confronts Wally West from a different world and attempts to kill him, however before he can succeed, he was killed by Roy Harper from his world, who shot him with wooden arrows in the back. Because, you know, it's like wooden stakes. But even if he went down easily, that does not mean he wasn't powerful, since, you know, a vampire with the powers of the Flash, and not just any Flash, but Barry Allen, the literal Speed Force himself, basically. Yeah, I don't think you really need to see why that's absolutely terrifying. If he hadn't have been killed by Roy, he would have wiped out humanity, and I think that's the reason why he had to be killed, so that didn't happen, because there is literally no way to defend against that, especially since Batman, the one who always has a plan to stop Justice League members, was the one who turned him, so there's no one really to fight him now. Halfway through into number 5, Morbius. First being introduced in Amazing Spider-Man number 101 in 1971, Dr. Michael Morbius was a scientist born in Greece who became a Nobel Prize winning biochemist. He suffered from a blood disease and developed an experimental treatment in an effort to cure it. Its side effects though turned him into a vampire adjacent who needs to consume blood in order to survive, and gain typical vampire characteristics such as an aversion to sunlight and the powers of flight, enhanced strength, speed, and a healing factor. His overall appearance changed as well. He gained fangs, his nose flattened to appear more bat-like, and his skin became extremely pale, like me. But he has less of a nose and sharper teeth. Additionally, the victims of his bite would turn into living vampires themselves, which is absolutely nuts. This character also made an appearance in the 90s Spider-Man animated series, which is literally my favorite thing in the world. However, since it was a kid's show, he couldn't consume blood, so instead he consumed plasma. And his origin was changed as well, so it could kind of be intertwined with Peter's, when he spliced his DNA with Peter Parker's using the neurogenic recombinator, and then a bat jumped in front of the ray. And in 4, Dracula. In Marvel Comics, Count Dracula is a centuries-old vampire, sorcerer, and Transylvanian nobleman who rules from his namesake fortress known as Castle Dracula. He is the supreme ruler and world's most powerful vampire. Originally the Wallachian ruler Vlad the Impaler, he turned himself into a vampire following a battle with the invading Ottoman Empire, seeking revenge to, destroy his enemies, because of course. Driven by a lust for power, companionship, and blood, his centuries of undead existence have brought him into conflict with vampire hunters, other immortals, and in the modern age, superheroes. Dracula has a vast network of loyal servants, cultists, brides, and minions who regularly assist him and attempt to resurrect him if he actually ends up dying. Recently, Dracula and his followers have taken up refuge in Chernobyl, creating a new vampire nation and bringing him into conflict with the Avengers. But given that he's in essence the original vampire, I feel like he deserves to be on this list. Also, in the Marvel universe, his name is Vlad, which just makes me think of VLAD PLASMIUS from Danny Phantom, and I love Danny Phantom, so. Getting close to the end, in at number 3, ULTRAMAN. ULTRAMAN was turned into a vampire by Batman, which doesn't really make sense because he's a Kryptonian, so without kryptonite fangs, how did Batman pierce his skin? But whatever. ULTRAMAN, along with many supermen of the multiverse, were kidnapped by the Prophecy to steal their powers, but they were freed by the Justice Incarnate. Later on, ULTRAMAN confronted Wally West from a different world along with the Flash and attempted to kill him, but Wally managed to knock him down with his super speed fist and hold him down with dozens of wooden stakes. And while he seemingly was defeated by those wooden stakes, I don't think you need an explanation as to why a Superman with vampire powers is a bad idea. Okay, that's horrifying. Although this does beg the question, does it cancel out the whole sun powers thing, since vampires are weak to sunlight but Superman uses the yellow sun to get his powers? Or is it just that a Kryptonian vampire is double weak to a red sun? Because he's already double weak to a red sun, but does that mean that he doesn't really have powers? I don't know. It's an interesting debate that I believe you should have in the comments, but respectfully. Can't believe I'm saying that, because no one's gonna listen. Who am I kidding? Penultimately, in at number 2, the Alpha Vampire. In the world of Supernatural, the Alpha Vampire was the very first vampire and basically father of all other vampires. He was one of the Alpha monsters captured and interrogated by Crowley and Castiel in their efforts to locate Purgatory. He escaped Crowley's prison though and set up a new nest in North Dakota, and then Montana. He was later tracked down for his blood for the weapon to defeat the Leviathans, and ultimately recognizing a common enemy, he actually gave the Winchesters his blood without a fight. During an attack on the British Men of Letters though, the Alpha Vampire was killed by Sam Winchester with the cult, the demon cult that can for some reason kill literally everything. I don't know how, but whatever. The Alpha Vampire is first glimpsed briefly flashing in the minds of his children as it's commanding them to recruit more of his army in season 6. Nothing is known about this particular monster aside from the fact that its messages can be heard by all other vampires, and he can also just knock him out if he wants to. Dean ends up seeing this vision while he is infected, but yeah, the daddy of all other vamps? That's a powerful boy. Finally, in at number 1, Varney. Varney was a human or Gigantopithecus sorcerer that once lived in 10,000 BC. Varney served in the cult of the Darkholders under Thusla Doom. Injured due to the actions of King Kull of Volsea, a dying Varney was transformed into a vampire by sorcerers of the pre-cataclysmic Atlantis. because he was born in Atlantis. He allegedly was the last survivor among the vampires created in Atlantis before the Great Cataclysm, and ruled over Earth's vampires. But in 1459, tired of his ages-long existence, Varney chose Dracula as his successor and Lord of Earth's vampires, and imparted much of his supernatural power to him by forcing Dracula to drink his blood. Varney then committed suicide by exposing himself to direct sunlight. However, years later, Marie Laveau, desperate for vampire blood, had kidnapped Doctor Strange's friend Morgana Blessing and his brother Victor. Strange was about to deliver the spell page to Laveau when reason reasserted itself and he forever banished the page from Earth, basically. Laveau, possessing the Darkhold, though, invoked a spell contained within for resurrecting the Lord of the Vampires. So yeah, the very first vampire of all time in the Marvel Universe, who killed himself with sunlight and then was resurrected, and also made Dracula, yeah, that's a number 1 for sure. There's no contest, even from the Alpha Vamp. No way. And at 10, Hammerhead. Growing up, his father would berate him for speaking Italian in their Russian household and would beat the boy with a hammer when punishing him. So, you know, Father of the Year right there. I guess that's kind of how he got the name. In school, he would later lie and say that he was Italian, only for a bully named Rico to reveal his lie and then steal the hat he wore, showing the ugly scars on his head from frequent hammer blows. Rico and his girlfriend would be the kills that Hammerhead needed to join the mob, though. Hammerhead convinced the mob that he was Italian, which was necessary since they didn't really accept inferior stock, as they would call it, and he eventually killed his father with a much bigger hammer than his father ever used on him. Poetic justice. When his head was shattered in a brawl, though, Jonas Harrow discovered him in an alley and operated on him, replacing his broken skull with one made of steel, whereas some versions make this an adamantium head instead. He would later go on to get a full-body robotic upgrade from Mr. Negative after being shot in the back of the head with a special bullet, which would have killed him. This is definitely some alpha energy.
Coming in at number 9, we have Crossbones. A genetically enhanced mercenary with a hazy past, Crossbones wandered the world as an independent gun for hire until finally catching the attention of the villainous Red Skull. With proficiency in most forms of weapon known to man and a particular liking for stiletto blade enhanced gauntlets, Crossbones doesn't really have an ulterior motive or dreams of world domination, but rather will do whatever grisly task a supervillain is willing to pay him for, such as the time at the end of Civil War where he took advantage of the chaos and seemingly assassinated Captain America. Whatever the nasty job, Crossbones is willing to do it, and that's what makes him such a dangerous villain.
And at 8, Silvermane. As a teacher, Silvio Manfredi joined a criminal organization known as the Magia. With his cunning and superior fighting skills, Manfredi rose to the top of the Magia's ranks. He later became the head of a family, which in mob terms just meant a group of loyal members, not actually like related or anything. By creating gang wars, he increased the power of the Manfredi family, and in the process he also increased the power of the Magia as a whole, which pleased his superiors, obviously, because more power, it's more power. Manfredi also married a woman named Catherine and fathered a son, but when he was middle-aged, his hair became white, which led to the nickname that he grew to accept, Silvermane. Crime fighters Cloak and Dagger decided to take down Silvermane because of his role in illegal drug trafficking in New York City. Dagger attacked Silvermane and nearly killed him using her powers. However, doctors saved Silvermane's life by transporting his brain, most of his head, and other vital organs into a robotic body that would then provide him with superhuman strength, which is nuts and exactly why we shouldn't try and put our brains in robots. I've been saying this since this list. Don't do it.
Coming in at number 7, we have Boomerang. Originally hailing from Australia and given his identity as a stereotypical joke by an offshoot of Hydra, Boomerang has no actual superhuman abilities, just an incredibly gifted throwing arm that has been utilized over the years to throw more and more intricate, high-tech boomerangs. Best known as a thorn in Spider-Man's side and one of the founding members of the superior foes of Spider-Man, Boomerang would eventually begin to have a change of heart after becoming Peter Parker's roommate and getting a bit too over his head with his relationship to the Kingpin. Nevertheless, Boomerang's incredible accuracy and the quality of his high-tech gadgets means that he's not a villain to underestimate.
And at 6, Tombstone. Lonnie Lincoln was born and raised in Harlem, New York. He had a congenital disorder characterized by the complete absence of pigment in his skin, which made him an outcast among the children his age. He also had a problem with his vocal cords, making him speak in whispers. The only student who didn't ostracize Lincoln was aspiring reporter Joe Robinson, causing Lonnie to misconstrue this lack of hostility as a token of friendship. 8 years after their senior year, Tombstone had grown to become a mob enforcer in Philadelphia, where Robertson happened to work as a reporter. When Lincoln tried to kill crime boss Saulsy Montana, his employee witnessed the murder and contacted the newspaper where Robbie worked. Robbie was about to meet with Hipper when Tombstone killed him and arrived at their point of meeting, only to find Tombstone taunting him with the man's corpse. Tombstone let Robbie go though, just because they used to be friends, but later taunted him on the phone, prompting Robbie to flee with his wife back to New York, where he became an acclaimed reporter for the Daily Bugle. This dude is freaking messed up, and if you've seen him in like the 90s Spider-Man cartoon, that version's even freakier.
Coming in at number 5, we have Typhoid Mary. A very powerful mutant with multiple personality disorder, Mary is capable of telekinesis, telepathy, and manipulating fire when under the influence of her more violent Typhoid and Bloody Mary personas. Her transformations between personalities are so intense that even Daredevil was not able to tell after encountering 2 personalities that they were the same person, despite his increased senses supposedly being immune to her trickery. Despite being a mutant, Mary has most often fought with both Daredevil and Spider-Man, giving these street-level heroes a headache as they try to deal with multiple violent women in one deadly body.
And at 4, Kingpin. A crime boss is one thing. A crime boss that to the public is a well-respected philanthropist and businessman is something else. But this businessman is like 300 pounds of muscle. Wilson Fisk is an absolute madman who runs most of New York's and Las Vegas's criminal underworld. However, things get even more intense after his wife is killed, so he doesn't end up retiring, which he was actually going to do, but you know, then they killed his wife. After the murder of his wife, not only did he resume leadership of his former organization, but he also turned over his files on other criminal leaders to the law through the costumed crime fighter of Daredevil. Kingpin actually helped Daredevil, except now this time he had the motive of ridding himself of any and all rivals. The ploy actually worked though, and as a result of the evidence in the files, many crime leaders both inside and outside the Magia were convicted. In the ensuing power vacuum, the Kingpin rebuilt his coalition stronger than ever before. He moved on to control a great majority of non-Magia East Coast gangs dealing in conventional crimes, and the Kingpin's organization became stronger than any single Magia family in the New York area.
Coming in at number 3, we have Barracuda, the arch nemesis of the Punisher. An optimistic and smiling serial killer and gangster, the Barracuda is everything the Punisher stands against and more. Originally just hired by a larger criminal organization to assassinate Frank Castle, the Barracuda's rivalry with the Punisher became personal when their ensuing battle caused the Barracuda to lose both an eye and all the fingers on his right hand. The Barracuda might not have any superpowers himself, but his depravity and lust for violence are essentially unmatched, with multiple moments over the years that rank as some of Marvel's edgiest, such as snorting drugs off of a fresh human skull and engaging in literal cannibalism.
Penultimately, into number 2, the Hood. After seeing Electro fight Daredevil as a child, the life of a supervillain really enticed Parker Robbins. With a mother in need of constant medical care, he soon dropped out of high school to steal money to give her better care. His cousin John told him about some valuable material perfect to steal at a nearby warehouse, and together, they broke into it. They were about to leave when they were attacked by a demon in a cloak. Peter shot the being and assumed that he had killed it, but not wanting to leave empty-handed, he took the cloak and the boots. For some reason, I don't know why you thought you were gonna get any money for it, but whatever. On the way home, he was jumped for his shoes and used the boots to escape. And upon finding out that the boots actually gave him the ability to walk on air, he took the cloak over to John's apartment where he found out that the cloak gave him powers as well, originating from the demon Dormammu, though he didn't know it at the time. A dude with a cloak and boots giving him a fraction of the powers of Dormammu? Yeah, that's a number 2 for me. Pun intended now.
And coming in at our top spot, we've got to go with the classic Daredevil villain, Bullseye. An incredibly skilled assassin with nearly perfect accuracy, Bullseye ranks as one of the greatest villains that heroes like Spider-Man and Daredevil have ever had to face. Bullseye was responsible for the death of Elektra and appears to have zero regard for life or any sense of moral goodness, with with even other members of the Dark Avengers being disgusted at his lust for murder when he was briefly a member of their team. While Bullseye often finds himself under the employ of characters such as the Kingpin or Norman Osborn, his rather unique powers and his complete lack of empathy make him potentially the most deadly street level villain of all.